Welcome back to TYT Sports, everybody. At the desk, here's the headline. Joe Rogan says there is a 100% chance he leaves the UFC. The Fertitta Brothers decide to sell. So Joe Rogan...
Are we talking UFC?
Yeah. Oh. Don't worry, it's not about Conor. You're fine.
All right, we're good.
So Joe Rogan, who's been a major personality in the UFC, obviously he's always Octagon side and always doing the post-fight press conferences. He's had a great relationship with the Fertitta Brothers. Now, it's not that he leaves the UFC when his contract's up just after UFC 201 if they don't sell. He's just saying if they are to sell, which he doesn't know too much information about, he would leave, which could leave an impact and an opening for a host. But there's an awesome piece of the MMA Hour, which I constantly throw to you because they're a great podcast, with Joe Rogan crashing one of the interviews. It's pretty fun. Take a look.
You leaving in August?
Who knows, bitch?
Come on, tell me. You know. You know.
I don't know. I honestly do not know. I have a contract that's up in August, and I have not made up my mind. I vacillate daily.
If the UFC sells, will you leave?
100%.
You're done.
Yep.
See ya. I might shave my head and put my resume in.
You want in? You want? Okay, are they going to sell? Do any of you know?
Stick my hand up his ass and work him like a puppet.
Are they selling?
Sir.
Are they selling? What's the scoop? Are they selling? You don't know? I don't believe you.
There are rumors for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm getting very vague responses. I don't know.
Wow, they're leaving you in the cold? They're leaving you in the dark?
I don't ask a lot. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't ask because when I call them, they want me to do shit, and I just don't.
All right.
McGregor aside, Jason, Joe Rogan leaves the UFC. It's done. They're done. They're not bouncing back. There's no argument you can make here that tells me that the UFC can go on without Joe Rogan. By the way, sarcasm, everything included, Joe Rogan is a huge part in the growth of the UFC. Mm-hmm. Do not overlook that. Joe Rogan is a great, I would say, ambassador for the sport. It's great to have a familiar face. A lot of sports have that face. We talk about Bill Simmons for basketball, that familiar face that you go to. In world football, it is either Jamie Carragher now, Gary Neville, but it has been Jeff Stelling, a bunch of different, I would say, analysts in there. You said in the NFL, we have Dan Patrick, we have Bob Costas with his pink eye and one Super Bowl. But
not the Super Bowl, the Olympics.
The Olympics, sorry.
Close enough.
All right, well, he was big for the Olympics. Thanks. Did he get the pink eye from swimming in the Rio Olympic water?
Did you hear, real quick before we get back to Joe Rogan, did you hear Jimmy Kimmel's roast at the upfronts?
No.
He said that he took out everybody, and it was amazing. They said, a couple years back, Bob Costas was given pink eye, and he hosted the Olympics, and now they're going to send him out there, and they're just going to inject him with the Zika virus.
That's what I was trying to make my joke to. Is it?
Man.
It would fit in well if he was to host the Olympics now. But I think that Joe Rogan, very good face for the UFC in terms of broadcast, and I think that he brings a lot to it, a lot of personality, and he's just an overall good. I don't think it hurts a brand to have someone who kind of speaks for them, very opinionated, and I think he's a good man.
Well, first of all, Joe Rogan, for our generation, I don't know if you watched it in the UK. I'm sorry, Scotland, whatever. You guys in the comment section.
We're still in the UK.
We're in the UK.
By the way, Ireland, it's not in the UK. If you watched the McGregor clip, you can skip to the end where I clearly stated it. If I didn't know that, I don't deserve to be on any platform talking. I don't deserve to talk.
You could be on platform 9 3/4. So Joe Rogan was the host of Fear Factor.
Yeah, that's
it. Was like one of my favorite shows growing up, and especially the Chappelle Show skit that mocks it much later on. But Joe Rogan leaving the UFC, I think, would be a pretty big deal. Because he is, as you just mentioned, the familiar face. He's always the guy. He asks tough questions right after every single fight, especially to the fighters who lose. He doesn't just let them off the hook easily. I actually think Max Kellerman does the same thing with boxing, especially HBO boxing at least. And some people think Max Kellerman's bullish in a way, while Joe Rogan seems to have like a funnier personality with it, but he always gets to the point quickly after each fight, which is great to see. By the way, in California at least, there's 2 new strains of weed that have been circulating in the stores, one of which is Joe Rogan, which he actually showed later on that podcast, the other of which is Steph Curry.
And that's the thing, he's open, he's obviously open-minded, and he's very progressive, not politically, he's just progressive in terms of he doesn't like to make a big deal out of things that don't deserve to be talked about, like weed. He's very open to the fact that it's still ridiculous that a plant. The fact that a plant is that illegal in comparison to all the studies and everything that's been going on. He was on that great Netflix documentary that Cenk and Anna were both on, Cultural High, and it talks about the myth that our society has created to make us scared of this drug, blah, blah, blah. And he's a strong advocate for making it legal, blah, blah, blah. Likeable guy, but there's very few personalities that you want to see leave from a sport. I think Joe Rogan's, as you mentioned, he was on Fear Factor. He's on podcasts where he talks about a bunch of different things. But I think that he has a personality that can go on and achieve and be great at talking other sports. But I like the fact that that MMA is like his niche and that he's just immediately associated with that.
UFC is, and if let's say he were to leave hypothetically, like, you know, does that mean that someone like Bellator is not going to throw a ton of money at him to go over there? Possibly, who knows? But I mean, I would never.
What if boxing tried to lure him in?
Oh, it would be great. It would be great. But there's something about, I don't know. I could be wrong about this, but when I think of the UFC, one of the first things I think of is Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not many. I mean, of course, when it comes to the fighters, you know, Anderson Silva and all these guys too. Like, but in general, I was gonna say, like, when I think of the UFC name association, it's a lot of it's Joe Rogan because he's always there, always octagon side, and he's a fantastic MMA analyst who really put a lot of effort and work into learning the sport. And I know he talks about it in his Joe Rogan Experience podcast, by the way, which I think just passed 800 episodes. And he does one once a week, 5 days a week, pretty much. Was a big part of this whole podcast resurgence.
Yeah.
Because this was before everyone else was doing it. And when you listen to him, he brings on MMA fighters all the time, and they're extremely interesting. He asks these deep intellectual questions, and they go on these tangents. Sometimes these podcasts are 3 hours long. And also, Anna and Jenk, I think, have both been on the Joe Rogan Experience in the main show, so obviously go check that out if you can.
The final thing I want to say about Joe Rogan as well is I actually watched a bunch of interviews with him before he even, like you said, in his Fear Factor days, before he really became that UFC analyst and expert. This is someone who I take a lot of, I would say, inspiration from when it comes to his analysis and everything else, because like, we know that we are still learning this sport, right? And by the way, go watch our clips 2 years ago, and you tell me that we haven't grown when we were talking about about MMA, we were talking about UFC. Yes, I once called Dana White Dan White. That is how far back we're talking, right? And I know you guys in the comments, you're never wrong. You have got everything. You know all about the UFC and the ins and outs, but the bottom line is everyone can be wrong. And Joe Rogan used to state that he was so wrong on many different things. He always changed his views when it came to analyzing fighter style, because fighters themselves changed their style, and he had to try and keep up with them and how they adjust. And I looked at that and I'm like, why would I beat myself up about the fact that I maybe get some things wrong? Because I can admit, my clip 2 weeks ago or last week, I was wrong. Jason out-argued me when it came to McGregor, and I was wrong in terms of still stand by the slight inclination that Dana White always wants to make as much money as he possibly can and still thinks that Conor McGregor is more of a loss than certain people when it comes to the dollar bills. But you learn from these mistakes.
Dan White.
Dan White always knows. So I look at someone like Joe Rogan and how he's perfected himself in that industry, and we try to emulate it. We try to just provide you guys with an argumentative voice, maybe just someone that you want to argue back with or agree with, and someone like Joe Rogan has perfected that, I think, in his trade.
Francis told me before the show, right before this, this is just truly a remarkable, heroic feat to wrap this up. If Joe Rogan does leave the UFC, Francis said he would shave his head bald to try and replace Joe Rogan. In the description box below is all the social media information. If you'd like to find that, make sure to check it out over at facebook.com/TYT Sports. You know, all watchable. We're everywhere. We're also on Pluto TV. It's cool stuff there too. We'll see you over there.